Alright, brush monkeys, we're back, and this week we're starting in on painting our buildings here. And as you've noticed, I've stuck one of them onto a handle already. Basically all I'm using is poster tack, and I'm just dividing it up into 4 pieces and sticking them onto the large Citadel handle, because as you can see on the bottom of these things, there's really nothing for that to grab onto, and it's way too big to just stick on there by itself. There's no base to it. So I'm using poster tack, and basically on each one of these corners of the handle, sticking that on there. Just knead it up a little bit, stick it on. So the concrete building, we're going to be using Vallejo Model Air Anthracite Gray through the airbrush. And for the steel building, I'm using Vallejo Metal Color Steel, again through the airbrush. And then on the parts that are going to be chipped away and showing old rusted metal underneath, I'm using Vallejo Model Air Dark Earth for that brown rust color. And we'll get into both of those here in a little bit. Now you notice I've got a lot of other paints laid out. That's for other parts of the same project. The Fang and the the Fang Air and the Ulthorn Gray are for the blue of the building and the white stripe along the outside of it. Same with the Nebula Red and Avalon Sunset for the steel building. But both of those are going to have to wait until after we do the hairspray and salt weathering. So what I'm going to do is base coat each one of these buildings with the airbrush. I'm going to do the anthracite gray and the steel and the dark earth. Get those out of the way first, and then we will come back and I will show you how to do the hairspray and salt weathering. And then we will get into doing the sorry, I gotta really stick that on there. There we go. So now I got a handle for the building. Alright, and then we'll come back and get into how to do the hairspray and salt weathering, and then we'll do the overcoat painting. The rest of these paints, the steel, the Balthazar Gold over here, are for the little metallic bits on here. Some of the pipes are going to be steel. Some of the bits around the hatches will be bronze. The matte white and the two Tamiya clear paints, the red and green here, are going to be for these little control panels up front and the little control panels on the roofs here, to paint those buttons, make them look all spiffy. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and take a pause, base coat these guys, excuse me, I got the hiccups, and then we'll come back and see how they look, and we'll talk about the hairspray and salt. Alright, see you soon. Alright, brush monkeys, I'm back, and as you can see, I've gotten the concrete building and the steel building both base coated with the airbrush. The steel looks a little different because I had to go over the corners with the brown. Any place where the paint's going to get chipped off and show old rust underneath it, that's what's going to be. I'm probably not going to do that much weathering to it. I'm not going to make the building look that beat up, but any place it could, I want it to look fairly realistic on there. So I've gone ahead and done all the corners. Like I said, it's probably not going to look that beat up, but I wanted to have my bases covered just in case. Most of the steel will be covered with the regular paint, although there's going to be some places like wide flat areas like this where I may go ahead and chip some paint off anyway. Some on the door there, just to show new damage to it and show that steel underneath. Otherwise there's really no point in painting the steel, right? So that's those two buildings. Now, I'm going to take a break and let those dry for a little bit, but I wanted to get into the hairspray and salt method just a little bit before I actually go into it. So what you're going to need is you're going to need a little plastic cup like this, some hairspray. I use this Aquanet Extra Super Hold stuff, some salt. I like to use the Morton kosher salt because it comes out in big flakes, big pieces, and I use a little mortar and pestle here to grind those up. So I'm going to go ahead and pour a little bit out into the... Now you may notice there's a bunch of gunk in that. Because I'm not using this for food, this isn't this. I keep a separate supply of salt for my weathering than I do for my eating. So all of that is little paint chips and junk, is salt that's been painted from other projects. You just grind it up. And you know, once you brush it off the miniature and you've done your grinding, you've done your weathering with it, you really don't need to hang on to it. I mean, you don't need to throw it out, but I mean, you don't need to worry about just pouring that salt back into the original container. So I'll put it in there. Sometimes there's like really big chunks, sometimes there's little tiny chunks. I like to have fairly small chunks because it looks realistic. And then just put it in the mortar or pestle and grind it down until it's manageable, about table salt size. And then we'll get to how to apply it here in a little bit. For right now, I'm going to let the buildings finish drying, and then when we come back, we'll show you how to do the salt weathering. All right, see you soon. All right, so let's talk about the hairspray and salt weathering method. This is one of those methods that I said I was going to talk about during the painting stage of things. There's a lot of, when you're doing weathering on any kind of models, there's a lot of, you have to have a plan of how you're going to do it, because there are some parts like the bullet holes that we put in the side here, the little cannon hole, the chips and scratches and whatnot, that all have to be done in the prepping and priming phase. Then there's other methods like hairspray and salt that need to be done in the painting phase. And then there's other methods like weathering powders and what have you that we'll get into in the next phase of finishing up the models. And those all come together to create kind of a cohesive look of a worn building. The hairspray and salt method is one of those ones that has to be done during the painting. And basically what it is you're using hairspray because of the stickiness and the hold of it. Is what you're going to do is paint it along the corners and any place that you think the paint might get rubbed off on a building. We're going to paint it around the bullet holes and what have you on that one. And then you sprinkle the salt over the top of it, and the salt sticks to the hairspray. You let all that dry, and then you paint your building colors over the top of it. Then all you have to do is rub off the salt, and it'll leave those little kind of scratchy look to the building. However, because this hairspray is meant to handle hair, and it's got a pretty wide cone of spray to it, you're going to want something to put it in, which is why we have this little cup here. You're going to take the cup and it's going to spray the hairspray into the cup like that, and just go nuts, get a good amount in there. If you're doing this indoors in a shop like I'm doing, it might help to have a ventilator or a face mask or something on. At the very least, be prepared to get this stuff pretty much everywhere, so I'll wipe it off my hands here. But yeah, the hairspray has a pretty wide cone of spray to it, and you don't want it everywhere. You want it where you want it, right? So then what we're going to do is, I've sprayed the stuff that stuff in the cup is what you want. So you just use an old brush. I'm just using like a number 3 craft brush. And I'm just going to paint it all around these bullet holes here. All around this hole. And these scratches. And then it's going to take a little bit of the salt and sprinkle that all over. It's always best to use too much than too little, because you can always kind of tap it off. You should end up with something that looks like that. And this is why I put a paper towel down, because this does get messy as all get out. But the end result, which you'll see when I finish this thing, is well worth the mess. If you feel like it doesn't quite get enough on there, just go ahead and put some more on there. It's alright. Kind of one of those Bob Ross happy little accident kind of things. Just put a little bit of hairspray and salt wherever you want it to go. Maybe we got a little scratch that lives over here. Oops. Around these scratches on the side. And usually you want to work in pieces like this. You don't want to do all the hairspray all over the model that you're going to do and then go back and try to put the salt on it, because the hairspray will dry and then it won't be sticky anymore. Alright. Just doing little patches like this is usually good. And you can see by some of the size of the grains on here why I grind it up in the mortar and pestle, because that's going to be big chunks of paint taken off when it comes time for that. Like having to look for all the places I put little scratches and stuff now. Alright, I think that will just about do it. I think that's every place I damaged the concrete. Yeah, okay. So now I got salt and stuff all over that. I'm going to let that sit and dry, and what's going to happen is I'm going to take the blue and the white that I've got for the stripe and the building and everything. I'm going to paint everything all over that. And probably apply the graffiti decals, although I don't think I've got any graffiti over any place that's got damage, so that'll work. I'm going to paint over all that, and then I'll let the paint dry, and then I'll go through and just rub this off, and that will scratch the top layer of paint to show the bare concrete underneath. It's gonna look really cool, I'm telling you. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here and do the steel building. And then we'll come back and see how the steel looks, all weathered up, and probably put some more hairspray in the cup here. So, yeah, I'm going to go do the steel, and then we'll come back and see how it looks. All right, see you soon. Bye. All right, so I've got the hairspray and salt done on the steel building. And you can see there's some places that I didn't do hairspray and salt. You know, maybe that'll get damaged, maybe it won't, I don't know. There's other ways to do a little bit of damage like that, like you can spray it and then just take a nail file to it. Something like that, just a regular nail file. Or you can take a little pair of tweezers or something and just kind of scratch it a little bit. Not enough to get deep in, but enough to take away the top layer of paint. my reasoning on this building was that this was going to be a pretty heavily worn building and it was going to take a lot of damage. So I kind of did it around every corner and every edge. This building's been here a while. And then the concrete building, of course, any damage it takes is going to dig into the concrete too. So it's not going to take as much damage from the environment and the weather, but it will take a lot more from impacts with things. And that's why all the damage I did to the building in the last video got hairspray and salted on this one, whereas I didn't do as many of the corners and things like that. And maybe that's a newer building too. Maybe they decided to go with concrete instead of steel because it was cheaper. So so all that hairspray and salt is still kind of wet on there. I'm going to let that dry, and then when we come back, we'll put down the base coats of the colors that the buildings are going to be. That one's going to be blue with a white stripe. That one's going to be red with a yellow stripe. And then you may be wondering why I have the three paints set aside that I normally use for my OSL effects. It's these little windows here along the top of the thing. I'm going to do a blue OSL effect on those windows. But we have to do the hairspray and salt weathering before we do the OSL, otherwise the OSL won't look right. Chip away part of the lighting effect and it's not going to look right. So like I said, I'm going to let this dry and then we'll put on the top layer of paint and then we'll chip away the salt and see how that looks. Alright, see you soon. Bye. Alright, so we got the buildings base coated with the airbrush, and now we're just going to take off all the salt and weathering. Because the salt weathering crossed over the stripe that I wanted on the building, I went ahead and did the stripes with the airbrush as well. So it's so that'll chip away and you won't have this like perfect stripe down the middle of a worn out building. So to take the salt off, all I've got is I've got an old soft bristle brush, and you can see I've put down some newspaper. This is where it gets kind of messy, and you just scrub it, scrub it, scrub it, scrub it, scrub it, scrub it, scrub it. Just scrub all that salt off of there. And you can see, particularly over the stripe area, where that salt takes the paint off. Scratches the paint. Sometimes the salt wants to stick quite a bit better than anticipated, and it's okay to just go in and pick it off. But now you can see, particularly around that bullet hole there, that we've chipped the paint off. We'll get all the paint off around these bullet holes. And later on we'll use weathering powder to really accentuate these bullet holes, and you can see what I'm talking about. You don't have to use a toothbrush, by the way. You can just use your thumb sometimes. Just rub that off. So there you go. You can see the damage around the scratches there. You can see the damage around the bullet holes. Sometimes you need to take a pick and go in there and get the salt out of the holes. You can see the damage around the doorway. Yeah, pretty lightly little damaged building there. And then the steel one, I suspect this one, because this one is more heavily weathered, it will see more of a difference in this one. There's also more of a stark difference between the red and the steel. underneath. Yep, sorry. So you can see that rust and the chipping in the paint around the hatch there. A lot more scoring and damage to the paint. Alright, so just looking at that, you can see the difference that's made. Try and get some of those out of there. There we go. Now you can see quite a bit more paint scarring and whatnot around the door, on the front. There you go. A nice time-tested, battle-worn building there. And you see it comes off fairly easily. Like I said, what you can't get with the brush, you can easily get with your fingernail. Just chip that off. Not a big deal. Kind of rub it off with your fingertip. Alright, so there you go. Now you can see all that battle damage on the building. You can see all the chipping in the paint. Now it looks old and worn, even though I just got done painting it like 2 minutes ago. That's looking pretty good, right? Or like how that turns out. Now some of this stuff I will go over and dry brush with a little Riser Rust. Some of it will get some weathering powders put on there. Some of it will be done another way. All of that, however, is going to wait until the next video, because this is the only weathering step that needs to be done during painting. Now the rest of the painting is going to involve painting these little conduits here, up here, painting the light, doing the airbrush on the windows, the OSL on the windows. I'm going to do that next. But we'll do some soot scarring and some dust around there, some soot on the vents here, but all of that will be the OSL I'll do next, and then we'll get to painting these little conduits and what have you, and the doors, and finish up the painting on the buildings. So for right now, that is the hairspray and salt weathering method, and you can see that's a pretty quick and effective way of doing it. You just left the salt on there overnight and rubbed it off in about less than 8 minutes to get all that off of both buildings. So thanks for watching, and we will see you. Well, sorry, I'm going to wrap up the video there. I'm going to take a break, and then we'll come back and get into some of the rest of the painting on these. All right, see you soon. Bye. All right, I'm back, and as you can see, I've got all the OSL done on the windows. So they're all lit up nice. Looks like a nice homey little habitat on a distant planet. So up next we're going to do the metallics and also some other painting effects we're going to do. Like we're going to do this in bronze, this little air vent up here, in bronze with a steel blade. While on the bronze, we're going to use what's called Citadel Nihilic Oxide, which simulates the look of rusted brass or rusted bronze. As you probably know, brass and bronze don't rust, they just kind of get this green kind of patina on it, and so we're going to be using that. We're also going to be using typhus corrosion on some of the corners and exposed metal on here. This is not just a paint, it's also got texture, little particles in it, a little grit. It's for the rust dry brush to pick up on. And we're using the Citadel version on this. Vallejo also produces one in their game effects called Dry Rust 72.136. And I haven't had a chance to try this one out yet, but as I understand it's essentially the same thing as the typhus corrosion. And finally, we're going to be going over once the typhus corrosion dries, we'll be dry brushing it with the Rise of Rust to give that look of new rust. That kind of bright orange look of new rust. And of course I've got the white out and the two Tamiya clear paints for the control panels here and on the roof. So we'll be painting the buttons in white and then going over them with one of the Tamiya clear paints to give them that look of lit up buttons. And I haven't quite decided if I'm going to paint the doors or leave them the way they are. I kind of skipped painting the whole door on this one because I thought I was going to paint it steel, and I still might. This one I actually painted the door, and so I might go ahead and just leave that the way it is. Haven't quite decided all what I'm going to do on these. I've got a plan sketched out, but the details are still kind of up in the air. So yeah, that's going to be the painting part of it. Next week I'm going to take a break and let the OSL finish drying, and then we'll come back to do those metallics and stuff like that. We'll talk about it next week a little bit later. Alright, see you soon. Bye. Alright, I'm back, and I've gotten some stuff done on these guys. As you can see, I did the little design on the door, the little logo and the buttons. Painted the tank like a little fuel tank. I decided I want to make that a fuel tank. Did steel on the vents and on the pipes there. A little bit on the back, some on the top. So I did the buttons there. It's looking pretty good. This one's kind of done kind of the same. Did the little Mechanicus logo there. I did the, because I decided this was going to be in an Adeptus Mechanicus building, I did the logo there in black and white, and then I did the black and white on this cog on the inside of the vent fan. Did the buttons, did the tank, same pipes here. Painted up this gun barrel that I decided was going to be a radio array. Painted that up, and it's looking all pretty spiff. So yeah, it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to pause here and let that dry because a lot of it is still kind of wet, and then we're going to go over a lot of it with Agrax Earthshade, and we'll get into the Nihilic Oxide, Typhus Corrosion, and Rise of Rust as well. So we're going to be doing this, and that'll wrap up the painting portion of the weathering. The next video we'll get into weathering powders and these weathering pencils, using those on there, and also doing water slide transfers. Like, I've decided these little spaces on the top of the buildings here are going to have building numbers, so I've got some numbers I'm going to cut out and put up on there. And I've also got this transfer sheet of graffiti that I got from a magazine. We're going to put those on there in places too, and then weather those with the weathering powder so they'll fit in with the rest of the building and still look kind of old and roughed up and dirty. Alright, so for right now I'm going to take a break, then we'll come back and start doing the painting weathering on these. So I will see you soon. Bye. Alright, I'm back, and I've given both these buildings an all-over wash of Agrax Earthshade, which as you can see is still kind of dark, and it's kind of dirtied up the buildings, made them all nice and gritty. And my reason for doing this is, first of all, it provides a good baseline for the weathering we're going to be doing later, and kind of gets everything looking alike. And for another thing, it can be done in several stages. It can be done now, and it can be done a little bit later, and I like to do it in both sides. Like, I'm doing it all over now, and then we'll go back after I put in the building numbers and the graffiti and that kind of thing, and wash over those as well with it, just to kind of blend them in. But I like to do it now as well, because this provides a good base for the nihilic oxide and the typhus corrosion that we're going to put on these buildings. And it helps it not to look like that damage is only to that one piece or that one part of it. As you can see right here, putting the Agrax on there has dulled down that bronze a little bit there and on the front of the door. Now when I put the nihilic oxide on there, it's going to be dull and then weathered, which is how bronze looks when it gets weathered. And it looks much more realistic. Like I said, these are both still wet, so I'm going to let them dry, and then I'll come back and we'll do the nihilic oxide and the typhus corrosion. And then when we come back, we'll dry brush the typhus corrosion with the rise of rust, and you'll see all those nice rust effects come out. And I think it's going to look really good. That's especially true on things like the pipes here. Before I put the typhus corrosion on them, the shade wash makes them look kind of darker and dirtier. Looks like more like old rust, and then the typhus corrosion and rise of rust will look like new rust on those. So it's going to make a huge difference, and you'll see that when I get to that. But for right now, I'm going to take a break, let these dry, and then we'll come back and rust up the rest of the stuff. All right, see you soon. Alright, we're swiftly approaching the end of this video, so I know it's been a long trip, a lot to cover. Hopefully the next one won't be as long. So on this you can see I've done the nihilic oxide, and I've put the typhus corrosion on the steel parts on both of these buildings. Now with the nihilic oxide, because it's your weathering bronze or brass, you want to keep in mind how that weathering is going to happen. For instance, the two pieces on the top here, any weather that comes down, like rain, that's going to cause those to rust, are going to come straight down on top of it. So basically all I did for both these buildings was I painted on the nihilic oxide everywhere I thought it was going to be, including the door, the bronze piece on the door here. And since that's the only three pieces on this one, I did it here, here, and here. And then I went and wiped it off with a sponge. Just one of these little triangular makeup sponges. Wipe it off on the top, wipe it off there as much as I can. And then I kind of wiped it in streaks on the door, because I knew any rain hitting the door is going to streak down. So most of the oxide is going to be at the bottom of the door, like you see here, and just kind of streaks on the rest of it. So, and then for the typhus corrosion, you can't hardly see it, but I basically just stippled it on top. You know, I didn't get into the cracks and crevices in there, because the new rust really won't be in the cracks and crevices. Got a little bit on top, a little bit on the covers of the vents here. I'm trying to keep this on camera. And just right over the top of the pipes. Same with this one. This one got a little bit heavier because I've been weathering this one a little heavier, but it got a little bit of typhus corrosion on the door and the door jamb where we had done the salt weathering. A little bit stippled on over the vents and around the corners and everything. I didn't do the radio antenna because I figured with Mechanicus, they'd probably let it get a little dirty, but not so bad that it starts rusting and it affects its performance. Same with the nylon oxide. I put it on the top, and you can see it got a little heavier there where water is going to gather between those two pieces that are touching. But for the most part, around the side, you don't see it very much. But on the top, you get it down in those little pits, a little more on the top there. There's a little bit of rust there, a little bit of rust along here. Rust around the hatch where I'd done that. And basically what I did was, when I was painting it on, I just kind of stippled it on like that. Because you want to avoid any kind of, if you paint it on, it's going to leave a straight line. And rust doesn't really grow like that. So I stippled it on everywhere that I did it. All around here, on the pipes. So you can see the bare metal showing through the pipes there. Around there. So on and so forth. Everywhere that I thought the rust would probably show up well. Get just a little bit more on the top of these things. There we go. Around these little bands here. There's that. And like I said, along the top I did some salt and hairspray weathering along the sides of the thing to show, you know, damage caused by like sand or wind or whatever. The actual rust is really only going to be along the top where the wind and rain are coming down. So some parts of that are still a little bit wet. I'm going to let those dry, and then we'll go over them with the Rise of Rust and show you the finished product. Alright, see you soon. Bye. Alright, so I've applied the Rise of Rust, and much like the nylon oxide, you want to pay attention to how the weathering is getting onto this thing. Obviously from the top down it's going to be quite a bit heavier. As rain comes down, you're going to get streaks like that. But I've got rust on the vents here. This vent doesn't have an external grate like these do here. It's just got this little thing, so I'm calling that one an external vent, and we'll get into how to weather that one. These three are air coming in, this one's air coming out, is how I looked at it. But I did really heavy rust on these two little dials here, on the rest of this thing with the bronze, this little skull. And then for the pipes, I went really heavy, trying to keep this on the camera, went really heavy from the top down and did dry brush from the top down on that, so you get really heavy rust on the upper edges of all these little segments. And then coming down on this. Same with these, I did really heavy on the top and then kind of streaked down the rest of it, because rain's going to hit those and then kind of roll down. And this one didn't have a whole lot of rust on it, it had more nylon oxide. But this puppy that had a lot of rust, I rusted the hell out of that. So now you can see where I had the old rust. You can still see a little bit of the steel underneath the paint there. You can see the old rust. You can see the new rust right on the corners there. Did a little bit on the door, because the door is going to have a lot more movement. It's not just going to be sitting still rusting. Did a lot more along the top. A lot more on these pipes, the corners. All the corners of the building are rusted. I need to do a little bit more around the doorway here. But again, didn't touch the I didn't touch the radio antenna because I figured they'd maintain that without doing a whole lot to it. And the Rise of Rust is great because all it is, it's a dry paint, so it comes off an old paste like that. And you're going to wipe most of it off on a paper towel. And then right around the doorway here, just going to brush it on. And how heavy it goes on, it determines largely by, like I'm going pretty heavy on this, but you can go a little bit lighter and build it up, or you can go a little heavier and get it right out the gate. And you get more of that orange color the heavier you go on it. So there you go. And I did some around this hatch up here on top, along the top of this thing, because I knew the top of this rail would get a lot of rust, a lot of weathering, just like that. So there you go. All right, so that is going to wrap it up for the painting portion of the weathering. Next week we'll actually get into the weathering and finishing it up. Next week we're going to talk about these weathering pencils that I've got here. These from AK Interactive. We're going to talk about some weathering powders. We're going to get into talking about a lot more of the late stage weathering and applying things like we're going to get into doing the numbers and the graffiti decals next week too. But for right now, I'm going to wrap it up on the painting portion of it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye. Hey Brush Monkeys, Tom from Flying Monkey Studios here. If you like what you see, click like down below. If you want to be notified when new videos come out, click subscribe. Both of those help me with my YouTube numbers and help support me doing and what I do best. Speaking of which, if you want to support me more directly, you can visit my Patreon site and go on my Instagram page to see all the miniatures that I paint on this site and how to get your hands on one of your own if you want one. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. You can check both of those to see when new videos get posted. And visit my merch store at storefrontier.com/flyingmonkeystudios. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you later. Bye.